Now that we have Firebug installed, let's use it to look at our layout. Now the HTML that we're using here is simply a display of a number of games, and they're using some HTML constructs like floating divs to make it all look right on the screen. If we look at the HTML tab here in Firebug, we can see that we can walk through the elements here, and as we look at the body, we can look at the sections, and then finally a bunch of items that represent each of those games on that screen. You can see they're all using the game info class and then the clear fix class to make sure that the CSS float is doing what we want it to do. One thing to note is that this HTML representation is actually the document object model of what the browser has interpreted. This is not the HTML that has been downloaded into the browser. We can see that separately by looking at the view source of our page. This is actually what was downloaded. This is a representation of what is actually being shown in the browser. Now, why do I mention this as being two different things? Because browsers are meant to deal with malformed HTML. They're meant to recover from badly formed HTML. And this is important because subtle changes or subtle mistakes you make in the HTML that you're outputting can cause sort of egregious errors. Let's look at one. In my particular example, I'm using Visual Studio, though none of the examples I'm going to be doing are Microsoft specific. Let's pop over and look at the HTML that I'm using here. One of the things you'll note, if I come down to the bottom, I could make a simple mistake in my HTML and go ahead and make a div, but instead of making the required opening and closing tag, I could fall back to my XML roots and just make a self-closing tag. Now the problem with this is that this is not valid HTML. Let's go ahead and save it and refresh our page. If we go to the bottom of our design, we can see inside the body, inside this section, is that div. Now this div has been created as a opening and closing because the browser is attempting to do the right thing. It has interpreted that self-closing tag as a mistake, and it's attempted to fix it by saying, oh, there's no closing tag, I'll go ahead and throw one in here because it makes logical sense. Different browsers may react to this differently. At the bottom, we're not going to see any real effects here, but what if we were to move it someplace else? Let's take this self-closing illegal tag and put it just inside one of our other elements. Let's say this game selector object we have at the top with our combo box and such. Here we're going to see that it actually malforms the design. And why does it do this? It does this because when we look at our body tag, and here's that game selector tag, it is putting everything inside of a div. Because it didn't detect a closing tag, it's trying to recover from that gracefully, and it does that accidentally by putting everything that was after that tag in the closing tag. That means that everything inside of the game selector is now within a different div, may start to break CSS rules and other things, and it's changing the way our page looks. This is a classic layout problem in HTML where we're not getting an error, we're not getting a warning. The browser is attempting to do what it's supposed to do, which is gracefully attempt to display the HTML without throwing errors. That's what it does when it can't find the correct end tags and beginning tags and those sorts of things. So by looking at the HTML here in Firebug, we're able to see what the browser has interpreted from our HTML, and hopefully we notice this as a big problem, right? We notice that there's a div here and stuff inside the div that just doesn't make any sense, and this is because this is what the DOM has interpreted instead of course, what we meant to have it. So if we go back and fix this by making this an actual self-closing tag, like it was supposed to be, refresh the page, we can see it now recognizes it as a correct tab, and an empty div doesn't really cause us a lot of problems, and there our design is back to where it needs to be.